Yep, that's it. Neil Armstrong once said, gliders, sailplanes, they are all wonderful inventions. They are the closest thing that you'll ever get to flying like a bird. That obviously was before bungee jumping was invented. Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and especially our distinguished guests, I would like you to know that I have always been a moderate thrill seeker. It began in elementary school, racing around on my go-kart. Then I graduated to mini bikes and snowmobiles. And in high school, every chance I got, I would find a deserted rural intersection and jump it in an old Chevy Impala. I love those old empty roads. But when I moved to Rochester in '96, I took it easy. That is, until the 1999 Olmsted County Fair came to town. I jumped at the chance to take my adrenaline affliction to the next level. There, right next to Broadway, was a 130-foot tall crane. For you metric people, that is over 39 meters. What was it for? Bungee jumping. I was in rapture when my fiancée and I were walking across the fairgrounds to that terrific Tower of Terror. It wasn't every day you saw a little girl jump out of a basket high up in the air and then bounce around on the end of a string like she's a rubber paddleball. But did that deter me? Of course not. I walked faster. I wanted to get in line before all the other thrill seekers. So Whiplash Girl landed. And I am skimming and signing the waiver. I'm 25. What's going to happen to me? There is also a sign over a cheap bathroom scale that stated the maximum weight limit for this ride was 250 pounds. Awesome! I'm under by 6. I am now qualified to hand over some money for the privilege of flying with gravity. While I'm emptying my pockets and getting my ankles trussed up to a bungee cord, there's a young woman that gets to take her ascent before me. I become a little concerned when she starts panicking when she gets just above the safety bouncy house pad that they have underneath the crane. She's not even 30 feet off the ground yet. At the very top, she did make it to the edge of the little plank that's on the edge of the basket, but ultimately, she came back down the crane the slow way. It's my turn. I shuffle over to the crane basket, dragging my rubber rope behind me, and then I stand in my spot in the basket while the Bungee brothers check those bindings one more time and fasten the other end of the rope to the bottom of the basket. At this point, I'm giving a choice. I can either exit the basket going forwards or backwards. I pause to think, and then my own ascent begins. I savor the thrill of anticipation as the bungee cord is tugging at my ankles as we rise up. And then I look over, once we clear the top of the mat, and I just roar with laughter. There, on the top of this safety mat, is a very twisted type of a bullseye in the form of a crime scene chalk outline. I look back down. I choose forward. I received some additional instructions on my ride to the top. Once we got there and the gate to the little plank was finally open, I was allowed to get into position. There's something very disconcerting trying to shuffle when there is a 30-pound weight dragging you into oblivion 130 feet in the air. But I get into position. I'm looking down at Chalkman. And then my aerial escort begins his countdown. 3, 2, 1, bungee! I don't move. 3, 2, 1, bungee. Bungee. All I can think of is, I will not write this down, I will not write this down, I will not write this down. After a myriad prompts of bungee, I finally let go. Oh my God! And then I'm weightless. I'm flying. I'm going straight down, but I'm flying. Hello, Chalkman! I couldn't believe how gently the elastic slowed my descent and then propelled me back skyward to 0 G's. And then I was falling again. I didn't get as close to Chalkman this time, but I didn't care. I flew, and it only cost me $35.
I'm going to tell you about a different adventure than Chris's. Not quite as exciting, but it was quite interesting still. This was in 1960, and I was trying to save money when I had to make a trip from Minneapolis to New York City. Does anybody know the shortest way to go from Minneapolis to New York City? Through Canada. You're absolutely right. You may have to help me. The thing is, I didn't really look carefully at the map. I didn't realize what I was going to be in for. Just about every kind of terrain you can think of is between these two places. There's raw jungle. There's exciting lakes and canoes and can just about every kind of water trip you can think of has to be passed. There's a river. We had to cross a river, and I even had to go over the Straits of Mackinac, which is an enormous, beautiful bridge to cross over some water. Well, in order to save money, I decided to drive in my VW. This was in 1960, with a sleeping bag. And I was going through the jungle, the village, the undeveloped part of Canada at night. It got dark, so I pulled off the road and went to sleep in the bushes. A few hours later, somebody came in with a flashlight and shined it in my face and said, "Why are you sleeping in my front yard?" I said, "It was so dark I didn't realize I was in your front yard, but what in the world are you doing driving around at midnight? Why aren't you home in bed?" He said, "I'm a cabbie." I said, "What's a cabbie doing in the middle of this jungle?" He says, "This is near the lock." The lock? I had no idea what he was talking about. He said, "Look, why don't you come in for a spot of tea and I'll explain to you what a lock is." So I put my clothes on, got out of the sleeping bag, went through his front yard, which I pretty primitive. And we sat down and he explained to me what a lock was. Now some of you must know what it is. It's essentially a part of a lake, of a river rather, in which there's a container that ships go into, and then they get flooded with water to get lifted up and down. I said, "I don't believe it." "Okay," he says. "Get in my cab and I'll show you." say. So we drove about, I don't know, 10 miles, and there was this big, beautiful concrete building. I said, what are we gonna do now? He says, come on in. So he knew how to get inside, and there was the lockmaster, the man who was in charge of the lock. And he said, this gentleman doesn't know what a lock is, and he doesn't know what you're doing. He said, can he do something here? And he said, sure. He said, look in that big window, there's a big freighter there. He said, your friend here can throw a lever, and the whole big ship would just go right up in front of our eyes. Well, at least he certainly taught me what a lock was. So when it was all done, we drove home with his cab, and he said, as far as I'm concerned, you can go back to sleep on my front yard. Now I have to have a moral to the story. And so the moral is, if you want a lot of fun and want to meet some very nice people, you can go on myriad trips in Canada.
Today, it's kind of an adventurous theme today, as well as the impromptu speech of taking advantage of the opportunities that you're given. I think that's an important thing, and that's something that came to me in what I would consider kind of my Price is Right moment that I had a few years back. So this was it would have had to have been about 2012. It was right before my first son was born. Actually, my wife was pregnant with our first son, and at that time, I should say. And it all started off with me sitting at my desk, listening to music, like I do most of the time at work. I'm a developer, so I have to listen to music to be able to concentrate. And at the time, it was Pandora. That was my free music player of choice at the time. But along with that, always came commercials, right? And one of the commercials I came across was for this scavenger hunt. And a scavenger hunt in Rochester. And I assumed it was Rochester, New York, because that's usually the Rochester you hear about. But it had my interest piqued a little bit. And if you don't know about Scavenger, this is actually a scavenger app. So what Scavenger will do is they'll take and they will promote a company's big promotion that they're doing, whether it's giving away, what all have they done? They've done jewelry stores that they'll give away some fine jewelry to, or they'll give away like the down payment to a house for some big realty company. This just happened to be for the Sonic, the Chevy Sonic that was coming out. And so at that time they were introducing the new Chevy Sonic in the Chevy line, and they had a bunch of different advertisements going on for it at the time. And one of them was this promotion that they did around in actually quite a few different towns around, where they did a scavenger hunt, and the grand prize was a Chevy Sonic. And how the scavenger hunt worked. So this was, and actually here, let me step back a little bit. This was something that was happening on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon in Rochester. My wife and I had been in town I'd been here for 3 years at the time. So I knew Rochester a decent amount, not a whole lot. And so I figured, well, this would be a great opportunity to learn about Rochester, travel around, do a scavenger hunt at the same time. That sounds like a good time. So well, we'll see. We signed up for it. We'll see if we go to it. You didn't have to pay anything to go to it or anything like that. And so they came the morning of, and we figured, well, and this is at the time before we had kids, right? So if we're up by that time, moving around, we'll go and do it. It's nice when you're kind of lazy at that time. You can just relax on a weekend. There was no get-up time, no kids banging at your door to try and wake you up. So it just happened that we were up, we were ready to go. So we said, all right, let's go downtown and do this. So we show up, get in line. There's quite a few individuals. There's about 300 people there ready to do this scavenger hunt. And we're looking around at the crowd, and we're like, wow, we're relatively young, in shape. If there's some physical aspect to this, that gives us a little bit of an advantage. Well, and on top of that, my wife and I, we're both computer science majors. We both are developers, and so the majority of our time we're just spending solving problems, right? Like that's kind of what we do for a job, and so that might give us a little bit of an advantage as well. And so we had downloaded this application onto our phone, never used it before, so didn't really know what we were supposed to be doing. And of course you can't really get into anything until the competition starts, so you can't learn how to use it ahead of time. So the competition starts, we start fumbling around, figuring out what to do. And basically what we did is we went around town. You go around town and you learn about, first you have to get this little clue on where you're going, but they actually point you where you're going as well. But you get this little clue about what you're trying to solve. So there's a riddle, whether, take the third letter of the state listed on the side of this, and you go over to the local embroidery textile shop, and they have a sewing machine with Minnesota written on it. If you were to add up all of the letters, what would they spell? Or or if you add up all the letters, what would it equal? And so you do the little problem, put in your answer, and usually it was a multiple choice. Sometimes it was fill in whatever it was. And we were doing pretty good at the time. We were getting most of the answers. We're running to the next one, and I mean it's an entire crowd full of people that are running around to all of these different locations at different times, and they all have the T-shirts on, right? Because they're advertising as they go. It's a great deal to do a promotion, right? And so we run through all the different places, and it's all through downtown. And one of the ones that really sticks out to me was on the side of what is the Episcopal church down here that's kind of in the courtyard. They have a big plaque where it talks about, and I believe it's talking about the history of the church. And the question was, if you were to take all of the letters on this plaque, and it's a pretty good sized plaque, quite a bit, if you were to take all the letters on there, how many times could you spell the word Chevy? And this was worth a decent amount. It was one of the higher prizes on there. And so we're looking through there, and I've got the whole list, and I'm adding things up. And my wife's just kind of looking at it, and she says, well, how about the V's and the Y's? I'm like, well, what do you mean? Well, how about the V's and the Y's? They're going to be, the least common ones on this list, right? So what if we just count those up and see how many times those are available? I'm like, oh, that's a good point. And so there's all these people that are there they're there for a good amount of time. There's a time limit here, so you're trying to get as many as possible. We added up. Sure enough, we hit it right on the dot. So that was pretty exciting at the time. We finished it up. I think the very last one we wrapped up, and we had just a couple of seconds left to try and figure out if we could get this one done. And we were measuring out the length, the height, the width of this car, got it in there, and then the time was up. And so everybody's standing around. They're calling people up for the prizes. And while this was happening, we were kind of comparing notes with people that were sitting around us, and they're like, well, we got this many, we had 134 points, and my wife and I were like, oh, we got more than that. So, and they started calling people up, and they call their phones, right, because they have all their phone numbers, because they're filling it out. And so they call up some other individuals and give them their prize, all the way up from like 8th place up to 1st and 2nd place. And they get to about 4th place, and they call these people up that we knew we had more than they did. And we're like, well, interesting, okay. And then it gets to, okay, 1st and 2nd place, we're calling you up, and we're not going to tell you who's which, but you're going to get into this car. And so we get into the car, because we were one of the 2 that got called up, and they said, whoever's car starts, you won a brand new Chevy Sonic. Turn the key, we won a brand new Chevy Sonic.
Yeah.
That was our take advantage of it moment. We went out there, we had a blast, and we won a brand new car. My Price is Right.
Madam Toastmaster and most distinguished guests. Well, I heard this story from one of my friends. He was a Sikh. If you know the Sikhs, they buy a turban, tie a turban out there. So he went to Australia with another of his friends who ties a turban. This was around the end of October, November. So he went to this portion where all Australians were there, and lots of firecrackers were going on all over the place. And he looked at it and said, wow, this is Diwali! Diwali is an Indian festival where people have a lot of fun. The Sikhs usually, they have a lot of firecrackers, and they gamble. And they have a lot of booze. And they have fun. The guy said, no, nobody in Australia knows what Diwali is. This is exactly Guy Fawkes Day. And that's not a good thing. This is a bad guy who was kind of, they put him into prison, and people are celebrating his death by busting crackers on a vacation. He says, fun. Then he went to another place, and there, again, there was a lot of firecrackers going. He says, Guy, in this part of Australia also Guy Fawkes Day is going on? And his friend said, no, this is the place where Sikhs stay. A lot of Indians stay. And they are celebrating Diwali. Which happens in the same day. He says, so let's go there and gamble. So you find my idea of vacation is have a lot of fun. Well, if you want to gamble, you gamble. But make sure you eat a lot. Roll in your bed, get a plate, and don't go bungee jumping.
Already. I recently was listening to, I believe it was a TED Talk, and I had never heard of this before, and after I heard of it, I thought, duh, how come that never crossed my mind? This TED Talk was about expanding people's senses, and maybe related, maybe not, but what they were developing, this gal was doing research and was working with people who have difficulty speaking, and they have devices. And what these devices do, you think of what Stephen Hawking's, and it's a very computerized male voice that talks a bit monotone. But this gives them a device in which they can express themselves verbally in absence of having the physical being of doing that on their own. Now, when you take a 7 or 8-year-old girl and fit her with this device, it sounds the same way. Now, what her research is doing is taking these individuals and reading the tones, some of the tones of their voice and the way that they sound, and then they have voice donors, anyone like you and me, who come out and have certain words or phrases that are commonly used in language, and they match up that language, those patterns of speech, with the tone from the 8-year-old girl. And they create then a device that sounds like that girl, not the monotone male adult voice that she had before. So knowing this is fresh in my mind, that would be where I would want to donate some of this money to that research and the development to provide these tools to people who might not otherwise be able to have them.
I truly don't know what you asked me. So, let's repeat the question.
What job?
What job would you have?
See, I had to reflect on that one because I was still thinking that I was filthy rich. So I didn't need a job. But I have to do my job here, really, and answer your question. A job that I really would like to create for myself would be probably the job of doing nothing. And nobody has created that job. What's up with these people? We have all these developers with great jobs. We have people with a lot of money that they can create jobs. I think, really, the job that I would create is the job of doing nothing. Don't you all agree? Especially because I'm giving a lot of great food. And with that comes retirement. And with retirement, guess what? There's no jobs! In sum, to answer your question, the job that I would create for myself, and I would love to do it right now, is the job of
evaluator, fellow Toastmasters, and most especially Chris. I'd first like to start out by saying I am so impressed that it's hard for me to believe that this is only your 5th speech. As far as this particular project, if you don't remember earlier when Abby announced it, was on body language. So project number 5 of the manual, and Chris, I could not fault you on anything as far as your body language went. You used the full space here. You had fantastic gestures, like the chalk man and shuffling and flying. It's just, it was perfect. You picked the perfect speech presentation for the use of body gestures, so I commend you. I also want to say out loud that this would have been, or should be, for future, a perfect humorous competition.
Yep. Yep.
And so I know you're gonna be tapped on the shoulder for the next competition. I'm guessing it'll be spring, when we have humorous back again. You need to be part of that competition with this speech. So for those of you that are guests, we like to commend people for what they're doing well, but also give them some constructive feedback for future. This opening, and I don't know if it was because you weren't quite sure of the words that were supposed to come at the beginning, but it wasn't a very assertive opening, and the rest of the presentation, we really felt your presence. So I would recommend clear eye contact at the very beginning and start with your first sentence before, looking at your notes. And the other constructive feedback I would give you is, I liked the beginning and I liked the end, but they didn't really tie together for me as far as, you talked about flying, but your conclusion was it only cost me $35. So either end with something related to flying or start with, what would you do with $35? Well, I did this with $35. Something like that. Just to tie it together so we have a nice circle. I loved your alliteration. I'm sure our grammarian picked up on that as well, but you are a king of alliteration, I think. I've heard it from you several times. The adrenaline affliction, tower of terror, aerial escort. He's got a great handle on that. So anyway, great job, Chris. Well done.
Witter, I'm a Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, most welcome guests, and most importantly, Joe. Oh, there you are. Hey! This is going to be a much better general evaluation of your speech than I gave the last time when you were here. Your speech was about 2 seconds, half a minute long. This is very exciting, so I'm honored to be able to give you an evaluation, Joe. It's hard to evaluate such a gifted speaker. And you told us a story, and I've heard a lot of your stories, and I've never heard this one. And what I loved about it, you asked us the fastest way to New York. So you kind of tricked me, because in my mind I was like, what's going to happen when we get to New York? I was so excited about getting to New York because I love New York, and Kaylee likes to have rice pudding in New York, and I wondered what was going to happen. And then we got stunted in a jungle in Canada, and I loved how you called it a jungle. Even though it's nowhere tropical at all. It's just, I just kind of went, oh, jungle. Well, that's a new way to interpret the word jungle. But I know what you mean. It's really weedy, and nobody's mowing the brush down. The blueberries are coming out of the woods. I know. I thought you were going to tell me a bear was going to attack you, or the Canadian Mountie. Something like that.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Then I was like, okay, what's going to happen now? So I'm supposed to criticize you. I don't have any criticisms, but did you prepare adequately? Yes, that story came out perfectly. You didn't miss a beat. It was an excellent storytelling, full of surprises, packed full of surprises, and for me, intrigue. It was so exciting. First, I wasn't sure if you got out of your VW and laid in the woods with your sleeping bag. I thought, well, that would be cold and dangerous, and you could eat by mosquitoes. And then you realize somebody knocked at your window to the flashlight. I thought for sure that was the Canadian Mountie. I'm trying to jump ahead of you, and I could never get ahead of your story, which to me makes the speech great. You really are the master of humor. And it asks here, what could audience members easily use the information to improve on their own speeches? And I would say yes, because you never say You never throw in a so to bridge from one sentence to the next. You just sit comfortably in your own skin, your head down, and then say what you want to say. And you deliver the punchlines so creatively, so easily. You laugh at yourself when it's appropriate to laugh at yourself, and you don't make us laugh. You don't try to trick us into laughing with you. It's there in your words and in your delivery. And I love, the other thing we can learn from you is that you always, or almost always, include the word of the day in your speeches, and you did it again. You said there was a myriad of ways to get to travel through Canada to get to New York or something, and I'm like, oh, he did it again. All I can say, Joe, is thank you. Well done.
Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and distinguished guests, and especially Chris. I know you stepped up and you decided to tell us the story, and it's wonderful. And now I probably will be listening to the radio so that I can see if there's an opportunity for me to win something. I'm not very lucky in that aspect. I've never really won something big. But it's a lovely speech. I love how you start with the day and how the day is normally going to be, and how you are communicating. You are playing on the computers. I mean, not walking on the computers. I mean, when I talk, this is why when I talk about being a programmer, I'll tell people. So what do you do? I'm like, I play on the computer, like I play with codes, So that's why I said play on the computer. I apologize for using that word, but when you walk on the computer and listening to music, I could relate. I mean, I understand like when you're walking, I need to listen to like some music that would just either entertains and energetic me, and if I'm too like getting tired, I stand up. So thanks for starting with that, and how the commercial, you relate to commercial, which give you the opportunity to, get out there and try to, do something about it. I don't really know how to criticize your speech, but what I'm thinking is that the moment you start talking about what's the whole event is about, yes, there's did they win or did they not? I'm thinking in my head. But then when you talk about like there's someone next to you that you have more scores than, I come to the conclusion that okay, it did win. So the only thing I would say is if you're telling the story one more time, put a suspense about someone who's trying to figure out their scores but haven't really figured it out, but it's kind of on the borderline of yours. So it might be like, okay, maybe that person wins and you did not. Because before you get to the conclusion, I'm able to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I really won. I'm really excited about that. So that's the only criticism that I have. But otherwise, it's lovely. It's you didn't prepare for it like you're presenting it, or you did it on the